constituency. SABC Chair, Dr. Crispian Olver, Executive Director, Presidential Climate Commission, PCC. Mr. Alex McNamara, Head of Environment, National Business Initiative. Good morning. I want to start by congratulating Dr. Olver, who has been appointed by the President as the Deputy Chairperson of the Commission from the 1st of January 2025. I feel honoured to deliver these opening remarks at our national stakeholder consultations for the UNFCCC COP29, which will be held in Baku, Azerbaijan from the 11th to the 22nd of November 2024. Your presence here today underscores our shared commitment to shaping South Africa's negotiating position as we approach this critical juncture in global climate action. We greatly value the insights and contributions of all stakeholders, from government, industry, business and labour, to non-governmental organisations, community-based organisations, and our academic and research communities. Each of you brings an invaluable perspective as we align our national climate action with global ambitions, and as we prepare for COP29, your active participation today is essential. Ladies and gentlemen, COP28 marked a pivotal moment in international climate diplomacy as we transitioned from negotiating the Paris Agreement to implementing its commitments. Monumental achievements, including the conclusion of the first global stocktake, the activation of funding arrangements to address loss and damage, with the establishment of a dedicated fund under the UNFCCC, and the setting of targets for the global goal on adaptation. As we look ahead to COP29, we recognise that we are approaching another decisive milestone. This conference presents one of the final opportunities for countries to signal their intentions for new and enhanced nationally determined contributions NDCs ahead of the 2025 deadline for the second NDC cycle. These plans will determine whether we collectively fulfill the ambitions set out in the Paris Agreement. Therefore, COP29 must build consensus, drive momentum, and ensure that every nation is on a sustainable path towards a net zero economy. The incoming COP29 presidency has set ambitious priorities. A 2-day summit at the start of the conference will bring together global leaders to raise awareness and accelerate climate action. Beyond the summit, the presidency is finalising the new collective quantified goal on finance, the NCQG, a matter of great importance for developing economies like ours. Moreover, there is a pressing need for large-scale financial support to enable developing economy nations to meet their climate targets and progress towards sustainable, low-carbon development. The current financing mechanisms have proved insufficient in scale and effectiveness, highlighting the urgency for a new financing model. COP29 presents an opportunity to advocate for innovative and improved financial frameworks that can mobilize substantial resources more efficiently. Such a model must ensure predictable, accessible, and adequate funding and address the shortcomings of existing systems and empowering countries like South Africa to implement ambitious climate action. COP29 will in addition aim to resolve outstanding issues under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Finalising the operational detail of both market-based and non-market-based mechanisms will be crucial. These cooperative frameworks are vital not only for reducing emissions globally, but also for fostering international collaboration that can spur innovation and help developing economy countries achieve their climate objectives. By establishing transparent and robust mechanisms under Article 6, we can enable countries to work together more effectively. This cooperation will facilitate technology transfer, attract additional finance, and support sustainable development initiatives. For South Africa and other developing nations, resolving these issues is essential to unlocking new opportunities for climate action, enhancing our capabilities, and accelerating progress towards our NDCs. Ladies and gentlemen, It is further crucial that COP29 accelerates the application of financial, technical, and capacity-building resources that will enable developing economy countries to meet the conditional targets outlined in the NDCs and National Adaptation Plans, the NAPs. For South Africa and other developing economies, these resources are instrumental in our efforts to mitigate climate risks, enhance resilience, and pursue inclusive, sustainable development. The new collective quantified goal on finance must provide a clear and ambitious quantification of the financial support needed by developing economy countries to implement their climate commitments and development plans, including the NDCs, the NAPs, low-emission development strategies, and other relevant policy frameworks, as well as key multilateral goals endorsed since Glasgow. This goal should also reflect inclusive, just transition pathways aligned with each country's nationally determined socio-economic development priorities. Access to finance must be significantly scaled up to offer new, additional, and predictable funding that is fit for purpose. Specifically, we need grants and highly concessional financing that can be effectively allocated to create enabling environments for rapid investments. By de-risking investments and creating new asset classes for clean technologies, we can unlock and leverage amounts of public and private finance. As we move forward, COP29 presents an opportunity to build on the progress we've made and to confront the complexities that remain. Climate finance, adaptation, and international cooperation will be at the heart of our discussions. South Africa stands ready to play a central role in ensuring these critical issues are addressed, and we will continue to advocate for the needs of vulnerable populations, particularly women and youth, who are disproportionately affected by the impact of climate change. The task ahead is significant and requires our collective resolve. COP29 is a moment for the global community to transform our shared ambitions into concrete actions. By uniting our efforts, we can ensure that the commitments we make today lead to a safer, more sustainable, and more equitable future for generations to come. I will be co-chairing discussions on mitigation together with my counterpart from Norway, and will head the South African delegation to COP29. I look forward to hearing your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. All right, we're doing very well on time, so I'm very happy about that. Our next speaker is Ms. Phemi Kasela, who's the Chief Director of International Climate Change Relations and Reporting from the DFFE. Please welcome her.
Good morning, Honorable Minister George, Councillor Pukunze, Dr. Oliver, NBI representatives, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, good morning. As already said, my name is Phemi Kasela, and I will be giving a presentation on our position as we go to COP29, which will take place in Azerbaijan, in Baku, from the 11th to the 22nd of November, 2024. If I could get the next slide, please. The UNFCCC COP29 will comprise of 3 governing bodies, which is the 29th Conference of the Parties, which is COP29, the 19th Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and the 6th Conference of the Parties. I'm so sorry. I'm told that my vertical challengement is an issue. So I'll try. Can you all see me now? Well, it's the challenge. What can I say? The three session, it will also have the session of the governing bodies that will precede it by the two subsidiary bodies. And that's the subsidiary body for the implementation and subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, what we call SABSTA. If we can go to the next slide. Let me try and see. Now, in terms of the background, we had COP28 that took place in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, and that marked a shift to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It concluded the first global stocktake on climate effort, operationalized the funding for loss and damage, included the new dedicated fund under the UNFCCC. This was a historic milestone as this was concluded on the first day of the COP. Parties also agreed to targets for the global goal on adaptation and its framework for climate resilience against climate impact. Now, moving to COP29 should focus on intensifying efforts to quantify resources for developing countries to meet ambitious climate targets. There will also be a World Leaders Climate Summit, and this is something that has been happening in the previous COPs, and this will take place from the 12th to the 13th of November in Baku. Now, in terms of what the COP29 presidency's vision is, they have announced that there will be the appointment of ministerial pairs, as the Minister George has already said that he will be co-facilitating mitigation with his counterpart from Norway. There will also be the new collective quantifiable goal, which is the NCQG, which also has its ministerial pair. The adaptation also has its ministerial pair as well. And the purpose of this is to help guide and inform political consultation on these important topics. COP presidency has also announced that there are two pillars of the COP vision. And here, the first pillar will be on enhanced enabling actions. So here it will be looking at finance and the new collective quantifiable goal, which is what we call the NCQG, on the fair and ambitious NCQG. Article 6, which is what we call cooperative approaches, the finalization of the negotiation, on Article 6.1 and 6.4, on loss and damage, and on Pillar 2, it will be focusing on enhancing ambition. And this will focus on the national determined contribution, the NDC and mitigation, the national adaptation plans and adaptation, and the biennial transparency reports and transparency. And these biennial transparency reports are due by end of December this year. Now, in terms of our expectation going into COP, firstly, for us, it's important that we have a strong leadership and political engagement that will be very crucial in delivering ambitious outcomes to meet the goals of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. It remains critical for developed countries to take the lead up to 2030 as per the Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and the Dubai outcomes. The new collectified quantifiable goals should reflect the financial support needed by the developing countries for their nationally determined contribution, their national adaptation plans, the low emission development plans, and the national development frameworks. And the NCQG should also be reflective of inclusive just transition pathways in line with parties' individually national determined socio-economic development priorities. So we're saying this COP is going to be a finance COP, and that's what we would like to see. Now, in terms of our recommended position as we go to the COP, on adaptation, South Africa supports ways to advance work on the global goal on adaptation, which is the UAE Belém work program. So I would like to see the development of indicators to be able to assess this global goal on adaptation. On Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, South Africa supports the adoption of the guidance of Article 6.2 to operationalize cooperative approaches. We also welcome the finalization of the platform for non-market approaches with expectation for funding proposal from countries. On the NCQG, as already said, it must be quantifiable. The financial support needed by developing countries to implement their NDC, their national adaptation plans, their low emission development plans, and other relevant framework. On the Just Transition work program, South Africa will push for no one-size-fits-all approach. We believe that there are different just transition, and this should be taken into account. The implementation must be non-prescriptive and non-confrontational, and support countries in defining their just transition pathways. On mitigation work program, this was a mitigation work program that was originally developed to exchange best practices, views on how to deal with the ambition and the NDC, and we're saying it's important that we preserve and respect the original mandate and scope of the decision, and it should not be a platform where decisions are made, but rather a place where it is sharing of views in the mitigation work program. Hence, we're saying the mandate should be maintained and the scope of decision for CMA4, which is the decision of the conference of the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. On loss and damage fund, we're saying finance must be new, additional, predictable, accessible, and adequate to support the developing countries, and it should be separate from adaptation finance and not increase debt burdens. On the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, we require a clear understanding of the capacities and coordination needs of all developing countries regarding preparing for, responding, and building to resilience against loss and damage associated with extreme, slow onset events, including through recovery and rehabilitation. This would be important, especially with the floods that we've had, so that's what we would like to see. On transparency, we support for transparency should be provided through multilateral and bilateral channels that is sufficient and predictable resources to support the building of sustainable institutional capacity for regular reporting in developing countries. Now, to conclude, a successful COP outcomes is one that reassesses the global solidarity to implement commitments and obligations already undertaken. The pursuit of a balanced outcome should be understood in the context of 1.5 degrees social pathways and the importance of sustainable development, poverty eradication in the transition. COP must be a real finance COP that delivers ambition and outcome-based new collective quantifiable goal that supports developing countries' transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient development. The quantum, which is what is going to be a bone of contestation of the mobilization and provision for new goals, should be consummate to the ambition of action. COP29 outcome must also redress the adaptation finance imbalance. Adaptation must be financed at the same level as mitigation. South Africa must focus on the implementation and the means to facilitate that at COP29. And South Africa stands ready to play a constructive role for the success of COP29. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pemi, for that comprehensive presentation on South Africa's negotiating mandate at this year's COP. I think that was very well done, and I'd just like us to give her another round of applause. All right. We will now hear from various stakeholders, South African stakeholders, who will share their expectations and hopes for the team that will be negotiating at this year's COP. They'll just share their expectations and their hopes for this year's COP and what they would like to see come out of the COP. First up, we will start with Councillor Kinalimang Pukunzi, who is the South African Local Government Association Chair. Welcome, Councillor Pukunzi.
Thanks, Program Director. Let me greet the Deputy Chair, outgoing Deputy Chair in absentia, Dr. Valimusa, greet the Deputy, greet the Minister for DFFE, Honorable Dion George, greet the ED of Commission, Dr. Oliver, and greet all of you, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, in your eminency. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It seems as if you are not happy. It's like I'm addressing the community of the municipality where I'm coming from, because if they are not happy, when you greet them, they will never say yes. So I believe this is a different audience. Honorable Minister, delegates, esteemed guests, it is evident that climate change poses huge risk for our country and the world. We are witnessing deadly floods in many countries in various continents on a daily basis. Many developing countries, including our own in the continent of Africa, are highly susceptible to the climate risk and extreme events, such as severe drought and frequent heavy rains that results in a deadly floods that put basic services under threat and cause damages on infrastructure that strain public budgets. If not addressed, climate-related risk could jeopardize our economic growth and financial stability, while disproportionately affecting the poor and the vulnerable groups, majority of whom are women, children, and elderly, and those living with disabilities. Given the continued and increasing pressure of climate change, acting at the local level is an urgent matter. Local and sub-regional governance across the world and in South Africa, both rural and urban, are in the front line of climate action, but they are unable to shoulder the massive infrastructure investment and adaptation efforts to require for sustainable low to no emission and climate resilient development. As a frontliner respondents to the effects of global warming, local and sub-regional governments have a challenging task of building resilient communities. However, a low-carbon resilient society requires a structural change of enormous scale and speed. This requires a joint action by all sectors of society and at all levels of governance. Coordinating these efforts and ensuring their coherence within a multi-level and multilateral governance system is key to driving forward effective, efficient, and ambitious climate actions. Honorable Minister and delegates, in this context of growing political debate internationally, alongside ever-rising temperatures, COP29 is more important than ever for bridging these divides and getting the world back on track for 1.05 degrees Celsius. The UNFCCC COP is central to tackling climate change as the only platform which brings together all countries in the world to discuss the collaborative on climate actions. However, as local government, we remain concerned that the world is not on track to achieve the SDGs. Risk overshooting the 1.5 degrees Celsius objective of the Paris Agreement is failing to adapt in human history. The window of time until COP30 is the most consequential, as parties are working on a new nationally determined contributions due in 2025 for defending against climate breakdown and keeping multilateralism alive. COP28 recognized the importance of multi-level action and the role of local government and subnational governments in advancing global action. We applaud this progress as we now move into the implementation of the United Arab Emirates consensus. To this effect, we urge South Africa as a trailblazer and a leader in implementing multi-level climate action and multi-level national determined contribution. Join the 72 parties who have endorsed the coalition of high ambition multi-level partnership that is called CHAMP in an initiative which aims to pursue efforts across all levels of governments for enhanced NDCs by 2025, and DFFE and sector partners to support the Town Hall Corps initiative that aims to amplify local climate perspective within broader climate processes, thus connecting local climate action to national through the new Climate Change Act and the global processes. This process encourages mayors to convene their town hall COPs as an innovative approach to basically bringing the COP to the local levels, where local government, administration, politicians, communities, experts, local stakeholders, and civil society come together to assess and discuss climate mitigation, adaptation, finance, and loss and damage in the concerned format. As organized local government, together with our partners, we see ourselves as implementation partners and keen to support the development, financing, and implementation of ambitious NDCs, national adaptation plans, long-term strategies, and other key strategies ahead of 2025. As a result, we urge the South African negotiation team to work hard in providing leadership together with other parties to ensure that COP29 builds on COP28 joint statement on climate, nature, and people, and connect with coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to foster stronger synergies between mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and nature-based solutions, food security, land degradation, biodiversity, protection and restoration, and health, as well as sustainable development goals, thereby ensuring that no one is left behind in the global fight against climate change. And we also saying that we need to deliver an ambitious new collective quantified goal on climate finance that enables a just, equitable, and a well-funded transition across all levels of government, including direct access for local and other subnational governments, in connection with the reform of global finance architecture and multilateral development banks. We also stress the importance of inclusive just transition pathways that are reflective of the country's individual socio-economic development priorities. We also say that we must ensure that grants rather than loans and concessional terms are prioritized so that the debt burden on local and other subnational government is not exacerbated. We also are saying that we formalize local and other subnational voices in the relevant UN agendas and strengthen their engagement in the UN intergovernmental bodies as suggested in the revised version of the Pact for the Future. We also say that we put the spotlight on the adaptation and secure the necessary resources by being specific on how countries will deliver on the global goal on adaptation and put in place measures to cope with and minimize the unavoidable impacts of climate change we are currently battling with at the local level. In closing, Minister, we are saying that we recognize that the COPs cannot substitute the progress in national policy making and implementation, but they are a primary platform for building international consensus on how to address the ever-worsening climate crisis. All parties must be committed to set up and contribute towards building climate resilience, putting people and nature first in pursuit of a resilient world where we don't just survive climate shocks and stress but thrive despite all of them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pukunzi. I think local government is a key voice in this discussion because they operate at the local level, and so they're quite at the heartbeat at seeing the effects that climate change has on communities. So thank you for that presentation. All right, next up we have got a representative from business, Happy Kambule from Business Unity South Africa. Please step forward. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Minister, EDs, all protocols observed, political leadership. I think, first and foremost, thank you for this opportunity to reflect on the positioning for South Africa. And I just wanted to indicate, at least from the outset, is that business has taken quite a leading role in ensuring that the just transition is not only implemented in South Africa, but also is being understood with the view of reaching net zero in 2050. Our position broadly for COP is more or less threefold, with a view as well of trying to indicate what we think is a credible outcome, at least for this COP, outside of all the other myriad of issues. I mean, this COP is going to be quite an important one, not only for the NQCG, but also for some of the other development, or rather the other building blocks of the negotiations as we move forward. So for us, COP arrives at a pivotal time when all regions are grappling with increasing evident impacts of climate change. This is compounded by heightened geopolitical tensions, trade disputes, and growing divisions between parties over issues such as carbon border adjustment mechanisms, especially between developed and developing countries. Many nations are constrained by limited resources, hindering decisive climate action, and developed countries in particular have faltered on their financial commitments with the attempts to reframe climate finance discussions. For us, priorities for this COP is that we need to focus on the special circumstances of developing countries and adequately look at predictable and at-scale support for implementation of climate action and just transition. As COP serves as a key platform for advancing the UNFCCC negotiations, and also allows for the opening of broader conversations about transforming the global financial architecture, as the MEC has also indicated and the Mayor has also indicated. This includes reforming multilateral development mechanisms as well as international finance institutions to better support sustainable development. For us, the NCQG, it's always a weird acronym, but the NCQG is actually one pivotal issue. And the main thing here is that we have to have quality finance, predictable finance. It must be larger and more comprehensive than the previous finance goal, and it must reflect the needs of developing countries for both mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage efforts, and the transition pathways that need to be undertaken. The new goal must include scaled-up financial resources while ensuring that funds are adequate, predictable, and aligned with the needs of the most vulnerable nations. And for BUSA and the private sector more broadly, we strongly support the principles that the developed countries or developed economies must provide financial, technological, and capacity-building assistance. And we stress that the support should not place undue financial burdens or impose unjust conditions on developing countries. Crucially, climate finance should not exacerbate the current debt crisis in developing countries. And ultimately, we understand that if climate finance were to be provided, we will find ourselves actually becoming more ambitious and implementing more innovative approaches to addressing the climate question. The current climate financial flows have been insufficient, non-additional, and shifting the burden, especially the disproportionate burden of the cost of climate action to developing economies, despite their limited fiscal capacity. Recent proposals for what is called the carbon border tax adjustment mechanisms, targeting goods imported from developing countries to fund developed country party climate obligations, are particularly concerning and disappointing. And from a view from what we are currently engaged in as the B20, as well as the global advocacy program around business and climate, we find that this is counter to issues related to fair trade as well as market access. From BUSA's perspective, climate finance must be concessional, primarily grant-based, and free from conditionalities. This approach would enable countries like South Africa to launch beneficial projects and attract private sector investments. Estimates for adaptation costs for Africa range between 259 to 407 billion per year, United States dollars, USDs, and not rands, with an annual average need of about 26 to 41 billion. We believe a new scaled-up, quantified long-term financial goal is essential based on the needs of developing countries and underpinned by a collectively negotiated roadmap. As BUSA, we did not take a view as to what are the scale or the size as well as the sources, where they need to come from. We believe that as this is a common but differentiated responsibility, the burden sits on the developed countries. Developed countries must fulfill their financial commitments under Article 9.1, including the 100 billion per year, per annum target. Failing to meet the pre-20 commitments has eroded trust among parties in the multilateral process, and the future support of this new and additional collective goal must avoid repackaging existing funds. Developing countries cannot be expected to resort to loans with onerous conditions which infringe on the policy space and worsen and worsening the debt crisis. For South Africa, we do understand and we do maintain that the priority must be adaptation, and our understanding in terms of even to the extent of the NDC is that we'll be focusing on refining and ensuring that the adaptation goal and our adaptation targeting within South Africa is further enhanced. But specific to the GGA and the adaptation gaps that have been identified through numerous processes, we believe that adaptation is a national project priority for South Africa, requiring substantial resources to build capacity and reduce vulnerability in the face of climate impacts. The private sector has been heavily impacted by climate risks such as extreme weather events, and also requires a strengthened adaptive capacity. These measures are essential not only for industry and supply chain resilience, but for the well-being of workers, communities, and ecosystems facing the brunt of climate change. Business in South Africa strongly supports the inclusion of a set of indicators relating to the strengthening of adaptive capacity within the private sector in developing countries, with a specific significant emphasis on the physical climate risk. On the just transition, we understand that as South Africa, we've been a pioneer in this issue, and we would like to condone and to endorse the approach that South Africa has been taking on the just transition. For us, the just aspect of the transition has not yet been achieved significantly within the international platform or into the international strata. South Africa must take the lead in defining its unique transition, ensuring alignment with our national interests, development goals, and access to finance. Flexibility is needed to support small, medium, and micro enterprises in this transition, and if leveraged effectively, the just transition offers an opportunity for net zero future that promotes sustainability, inclusivity, and prosperity. Given South Africa's urgent national priorities, especially around energy security, we emphasize the need for international partnerships that provide for both financial and non-financial support. A value chain approach is essential, considering affordability, market access, and meaningful participation from local businesses and SMMEs. In order to unlock investment and inclusive growth in the existing and new green technologies or green industries, a just transition is an imperative. Looking ahead into what is going to be a key defining moment post this COP is the confirmation of the deadline to submit NDCs. For the private sector, there is a recognition for the importance of enhancing the NDC ambition in a responsible manner. This can be achieved by implementing the agreed national emissions trajectory within the ranges specified within the NDC, while refining the just transition pathways. These must be supported by clear financial flows and strategies that address socio-economic challenges. At the same time, increasing the NDC ambition must be done thoughtfully, considering national circumstances and national climate risk, including energy security and economic stability. Enhancing South Africa's NDC should be approached cautiously given the country's development challenges, as well as its climate vulnerability, including physical and transition-related risks. As a decision has not been taken as yet, and the one that is about to be taken will not be taken lightly, we believe that there are profound economic implications in the mid and in the long term. The lower boundary of the South African NDC range is already acknowledged as internationally fair and ambitious, and is seen as a fair share contribution to the international efforts, and also signals our commitment to addressing climate change despite the domestic challenges. On adaptation, there is a pressing need to define a national adaptation goal with a specific set of metrics for tracking progress, where the private sector can play a pivotal role through investments in adaptation initiatives. Moreover, NDCs should highlight technology and capacity gaps, presenting opportunities for private sector involvement in technology transfer and innovation. Key gaps include the technical capacity and financial resources necessary to undertake project preparation and de-risking innovative solutions. Additionally, or rather, in conclusion, a clear monitoring and tracking process for our commitments in terms of how they are implemented in relation to the Paris Agreement is necessary. Therefore, our NDC should have a projected baseline of how far we have come in implementing the mitigation actions as well as the adaptation actions contained in our NDC, which will allow us to be able to demonstrate and reinforce South Africa's role in global efforts. I thank you for this opportunity.
Honourable Minister, thank you, Program Director as well. Honourable Minister, distinguished guests from the department, and esteemed guests, good morning. My name is Zahir Suleiman. I am 22 years old and I am a University of Witwatersrand student. Hopefully, as of next week, I will be a University of Witwatersrand graduate. So pray for me. Thank you. I'm here today to deliver youth perspectives and expectations of young people, of South African young people for COP29. I was in the capacity of being a youth delegate for COP28 and hopefully will do so for the same for COP29 and specifically negotiating as part of the Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment. I want to take this opportunity first and foremost to say that young people come in all of their different varieties. I'm not here to speak on behalf of all youth of South Africa. I'm here to just share some of the constituencies and their inputs towards COP29 and their statements, and we recognize all different various youth efforts towards this Climate Action Summit. So just reflecting on COP28 and what was done in UAE. So we saw the actual largest South African youth delegation, which I think deserves a round of applause. Thank you to the department for that. And we welcome the UAE consensus, which introduced a phase down of fossil fuels for the first time ever, although this wasn't without much contention from young people given the context. Reflecting, however, the UAE consensus provided us with a roadmap for how we can engage at COP29 and COP30. Despite some challenges and successes, the interconnectedness of of nations in tackling environmental issues was evident, emphasizing the shared responsibility we all bear in safeguarding our planet, and we need to build on this momentum. We recommend a focus on research, policy development, and grassroots activism, and we can bridge the gap between implementation and intention. The conference catalyzes climate change, reminding us that our actions today shape the world that we live for tomorrow. So with regards to the youth statement, we have divided our recommendations into the 5 following areas. These are areas that are particular to the youth and are just transition, NDCs 3.0, climate finance and the NCQG, adaptation, resilience and loss and damage, and ACE, youth and gender. On just transition, we the youth of South Africa recognize the need for a just transition that is important of South Africa moving towards a low carbon economy. Furthermore, to realize a just transition that does not leave the youth or any stakeholder behind, we urge the state to establish synergy between the JET implementation plan and the just transition framework that emphasizes decisive and distributive justice, restorative justice, and procedural justice. On Decision 1, CMA 4, negotiators are urged to ensure that the work program actively engages a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including workers, indigenous peoples, women, youth, local communities, and marginalized groups. In support of global solidarity, parties should promote global partnerships involving the state, the countries involved in the international partner group, and the private sector, civil society with an emphasis on youth, to mobilize resources, finance, and technical capacity for just transition efforts. And from Article 2.1c, we call for adequate investment flows towards realizing the commitments of financing the just transition by making provision for larger portions and provisions of concessional loans to alleviate the financial burdens carried out by developing countries. In continuation of the just transition, guided by Decision 1 CMA 4, parties are encouraged to develop and implement social safety nets, including unemployment benefits, retraining programs, and access to essential services to support workers and communities affected by the transition. On Decision 18 CMA 1, negotiators are encouraged to develop robust monitoring systems to track progress on just transition pathways. This should include indicators on social equality, job creation, and protection of vulnerable people. Parties are further encouraged to include detailed reports on the implementation of just transition measures within their biannual transparency reports under the Paris Agreement to ensure accountability and facilitate global tracking of progress. In summation, we are looking for a youth-centric just transition and for policies, international cooperation, social protection, and monitoring that ensures no one group is left behind. On the NDCs, in the upcoming revision of the nationally determined contributions, it is important that South Africa's NDCs are improved to address the urgent needs for climate action, gender equality, and transparent climate finance, ensuring a truly just transition that leaves no one behind. The current NDCs have some notable strengths, But as we move towards the 2025 revision, we need our leaders to step up with bolder actions by strengthening emission reduction targets to effectively align with the 1.5-degree goal and achieve net zero emissions by 2050, ensuring a clear synergy between the NDC and the IRP. The interdependence between the nationally determined contributions and integrated resource plan underscores the necessity for a cohesive and coordinated implementation strategy. And finally, enhancing gender mainstreaming and stakeholder consultation. The NDCs must develop context-specific gender climate mainstreaming strategies that cater to the needs of women in both urban and rural areas and intentional and meaningful contributions. On the big one, climate finance and the NCQG, this COP is being labeled the finance COP. For many reasons, but mainly because of the new collective quantified goal. This is to be decided at COP29. In 2009, the developing world committed to raising $100 billion USD per year by 2020 to 2025 to be directed to low and middle income countries. That target was not met for a long time. And funding for global South climate action has fallen short in quality and quantity. The mandate for the NCQG comes from Article 9.3 of the Paris Agreement, and it states that the $100 billion agreement would go until 2025. And then after 2025, we would need a new goal, now using the $100 billion as a floor. This means we would need quality finance. It should be emphasized that the quality of the finance is equally important. Negotiations around the NCQG should ensure that it meets the needs of those in the global South, both socially and ecologically. Grant-based, I know we've called for this one multiple times and we're struggling, but we will still call for it. Based on historical emissions and differentiated responsibilities should be prioritized. These negotiations around the formats of financing should take into account the role and mandate of public finance institutions. There should be an equitable relationship. Deals should not enable the top-down relationships between the donor and the recipient, and should ensure that recipient countries maintain their sovereignty. And finally, there should be effective monitoring and evaluation. Along with negotiating for the quantity and quality of the NCQG, it is also important to negotiate for transparent and accessible monitoring and evaluation processes. This will enable us to better understand the impact of the deals as well as address any failures. On adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage, South Africa should advocate for clear, measurable, achievable global goal on adaptation with sector-specific targets. The push for a global goal needs to be accompanied by a call for equitable adaptation finance for developing countries. We encourage the parties to develop action plans on how to better manage emergency response funding and relief aid for efficient and equitable distribution. The Loss and Damage Fund, operationalized at COP28, should be guided by party-responsive needs to complement existing structures while avoiding additional burdens on developing countries in terms of reporting and other obligations. And finally, guided by the best available science and as appropriate traditional and indigenous knowledge, and follow a gender mainstreaming approach. On a topic close to my heart as well, being a negotiator under this topic, for ACE, Youth and Gender, ACE Youth and Gender negotiations should see prioritized financial and technical support for implementation, including institutionalizing climate education, renewing the Lima Gender Action Plan this year and ensuring gender as a cross-cutting theme, youth and women-led capacity building, and specifically facilitating peer-to-peer learning discussions between youth from developed and developing countries, inclusion in decision-making and governance, embedding youth and women participation in national and international climate governance. We're calling for accessible climate information and advocacy tools, funding and support for youth-led initiatives, and promoting intergenerational collaboration. Going into Baku, we recognize and applaud the DFFE for its continued support of young people, and we are eternally grateful to sit beside them at the international climate negotiations. As we look towards growing our capacity and setting an example, young people are ready to lead. We are eager for the actions taken from the Climate Change Act of 2024 to be further mainstreamed in South Africa's international climate change policy and how it situates itself as a regional influence. And we recognize South Africa's role in the international community, especially with its stance on the Pact of the Future and the Declaration for Future Generations this past September, adopted in New York. After Baku, South Africa and South African youth will be ready to take the COP29 decision into its stride and foreign policy initiatives into its stride ahead of G20 and Y20, which we'll be planning to host. Post-COP, young South Africans are eager to integrate the decisions into their grassroots activities and youth-led organizations and seek further partnerships with government and relevant stakeholders to mainstream these activities. And finally, young people welcome and call for consultation processes towards the review and renewal of our NDCs 3.0 and the operationalization of the Climate Change Act. It is crucial to ensure that the nationally determined contributions explicitly reference and align with the objectives of the Climate Change Act for 2024. In conclusion, I'd like to acknowledge the contributors to the statement and to say that South African youth are leading. We've been participating since COP28 in various activities, including ELCOE, ARCOE, the Model Parliament, and the Summit of the Future, and we're willing to take this further with the department and all of the partners listed here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zahir. Okay, is that you? Please step forward.
Hello everyone, my name is Yakani Mjiako. I'm your COP29 DFFE and SAYA appointed youth delegate. But most importantly, I'm here representing the SAYA youth constituency that worked very hard to produce this. Look at how pretty it is. This SAYA document. So most importantly, this document outlines our ambitions for a justice-centered lens towards climate finance, as seen in some of the contributions towards the newly collective goals that aim to transform the financial landscape to one that centers grants as opposed to debt-driven solutions. We champion equitable agri-food systems that center local food systems, as well as the deliberate inclusion of youth, amongst others. We are hopeful that this finance COP will not only recognize the financial need of our globalized climate emergency, but also recognize the intersectional needs of such. We truly hope to see our ambitions for COP undertaken in negotiation rooms that we might not have the physical access to or the technical expertise to liaise in. Furthermore, we'd like to thank the GIZ for their continued support throughout the process, and we look forward to the Minister having a fun time reading it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the voices of the youth. I would just like to see if we can get back to Thando. I don't want us to skip him because obviously civil society is a very important voice in South Africa. So we'll try to cross over to Thando just with audio to see if that's better and we can hear him without any technical glitches. Technical team?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Thando.
Alright, let's start again. Apologies, network is just terrible. Bandwidth on our side. So I'll be quick because I think most of the points have been covered by the previous speakers. The main insertion I'd like to make is just one that relates to justice predominantly, and I'll speak to what it might look like for 5 topics. So relative to the NCPG, as I said, I look to support the position of the South African government on what they're trying to do there. I think from a justice lens, or climate justice lens specifically, the quantum is of critical importance. Of course, part of our role is going to agitate for the best possible figure that we could get, both as a global community, but also domestic and specifically global South. We're all quite familiar with the impacts being felt more so in the global South than global North countries. And so the quantum of finance needs to also support financial flows, particularly to developing countries, including our own, to ensure that we can build the necessary resilience towards climate impacts. The second topic will just be in Article 6. Again, broadly speaking, I want to say we support South Africa's position. However, around the topic of Article 6, for us, what would be a key consideration is how, in the implementation of Article 6, because I think at this point it's beyond the debate of whether it will take or not. So in the implementation now is to what extent it is that you can safeguard, particularly those who are dependent on natural environments for their livelihoods, right? How do we ensure that in the implementation of both market and non-market approaches that those who are dependent are not adversely impacted? Otherwise, we'll be making a regression in terms of our development. On adaptation finance, I think we've seen a lot of the impacts that have happened, particularly in the KZN region, increasingly in the Gauteng and northern parts of the country. And so, if specifically on GGA indicators, one of the key things is those indicators, as already stated. What's the justice lens there is to ensure that the key thing we all know is different, right, depending on the geography that you're in. But in a case like a province like KZN, and other parts as well of the province, where access to some of that financing would be critical for it to be able to bounce back as a province, I think is absolutely key. And then, of course, to ensure that there's a clear pathway as well for those who are affected to know where and which they might find that financing. On the Just Transition Work Program, the only thing we'd like to support, or not support, but emphasize is the additionality component. It's I guess, there's already been quite a bit of work that's been happening around the just transition within South Africa. I fully support the position that we are a global leader in this space and we want to maintain that position. However, not to do so without necessary support for our just transition plans, but also not negatively impacting those who will be displaced by the just transition, I think is absolutely critical. The loss and damage fund, even though it was quite groundbreaking having it settled within a day, is awesome in and of itself. However, it also has taken a little bit of shine, for instance, from the adaptation finance, but also has been a little bit quiet in terms of new funding committed to it. And so one of the things we'd like to push for there is particularly support from developed countries to continue to make transfers into the loss and damage fund, both for disaster relief, in a word, but also for the water mechanism. I think these will be critical because, again, they speak to South Africa's immediate needs for being able to bounce back from the severity of the environmental impacts and disasters that we're seeing increasing at scale.
Good morning once again, colleagues. Minister, Executive Director, Councillor Kunzi, delegates. I've met most of you, so I'm sure it will be easier for me to facilitate the session. And then I don't know what to do first. Take questions, additional comments. You can respond to the statements, to what the minister said, to whatever your organization has said you must come here to say. I'll take Richard, then I can see, I think it's Dr. Mutibang there, and then another handed back. So you can see already on behalf of my stakeholders and minister, because we work with them quite well with the department. Richard. I might be calling your name, just introduce yourself again so that you can confirm that I really know you. Or that the name I'm actually calling is really yours. Thanks. Richard.
Yeah, my name is Richard Worthington. I work with civil society, including being an associate to South African Communities Environmental Institute. And my question is particularly pertinent to South Africa, to the Minister leading the negotiations on mitigation, and is to do with methane. And what sort of position or approach South Africa has for addressing the misinformation currently being peddled that natural gas is clean or green. And I ask this not in the context of short-term deliberation of the role of natural gas in South Africa's transition to renewable energy. That's a relatively small question, but globally, with methane being 80 times more powerful than CO2 as a climate-forcing greenhouse gas over a 20-year period, we have been effectively ignoring effectively denying the impact of fugitive methane throughout supply chains. America is now the largest global exporter of natural gas, I believe, but certainly massive in there. And we're seeing more and more of this happening globally. So there is a methane goal. I don't think South Africa signed on to it yet, I'm not sure. But this is clearly something that needs to be addressed with absolute urgency, particularly given the findings from the new Earth observation systems that can now observe methane from satellites. So the latest knowledge and information tells us that there's been massive underreporting of methane emissions, and this could really seriously undermine work that is done to date. So if business has anything interesting to offer on the subject, I'd be keen to hear from them too, but it's really a question for government. Thank you.
Thank you. Business, I think you can also take a shot at that. Tando, your business now, no more side. Happy, yes. Happy would come in there after Minister and the lead departmental negotiators, I think. Dr. Mutaba?
Thank you. I am Pat Mutaba from the Department of Development Studies, but also representing SABC, South African Women in Dialogue. Mine is a question of statement, but to just say, can the department consider including women-led organizations as a key stakeholder? It's nice to see that you've included and you've made, reached out in the past to say that there must be representation of women-led organizations.
Thank you very much, Tati. The department, the PCC, please engender your negotiations. I think that's the right academic term to use. Please engender your content and your delegation. I'll take the hand at the back down and not see with any.
Gillian Hamilton, good morning everybody. I work with civil society in South Africa and I specifically work with the Green Connection. I have a few questions. The first one, Minister, we would love to know the details on the mandate for your facilitation role in the mitigation work group, if we could have some specific idea of what you've been asked to do. On the NCQG, we would like to know exactly what the quantum is that South Africa is supporting. Nobody has mentioned that so far. The unilateral trade measures, we'd like to get an idea of what's happening with the unilateral trade measures. Then, when will South Africa deliver its new NDC? We know the official date is in February next year, but we'd like to know when South Africa is going to deliver an ambitious NDC. And then, just to say, commenting on a few things, the first thing, Minister, please don't back down on the NCQG. Civil society internationally is supporting the developing countries, and we really are standing behind you, and we know that the developed countries need to hear this. Then we really miss the national stakeholder consultations that we used to have with DFFE. This is more of an information sharing session. I would not call this a consultation session. And we would appreciate getting more interaction with DFFE in the future. And lastly, civil society would appreciate a response to the letter we sent to the South African government on the G20 priorities. And I know it's separate to this work, but it is a very important aspect in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. That was quite a mouthful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'd like to thank the Minister for the initiative they're taking, but I see a dire lack of private initiative here. And we shouldn't only look for our salvation in climate change from the developed countries. I represent Zero Carbon Charge. We're developing a completely green charging network that will act as a catalyst for the migration to electric vehicles. I think we need to look at the opportunities and stop shooting ourselves in the foot. We started doing this, engaging with government and all government departments. Just to get a comment from Sunral takes in the order of 500 days, and they're still not forthcoming. 1 hectare permitting of a renewable site in the Western Cape takes up to 900 days. So I think we need, as a country, collectively to look at how we can get all our local ducks aligned to migrate off fossil fuels in South Africa for our transport sector is going to take 83,000 hectares under solar panels. The advantage is we can privately fund that. We can privately develop that without putting stress on the government finances and without staring the eyes of the rest of the world. So I think we should also look at the low-hanging fruit and do what we can do, but it's impossible by having gatekeepers in all state and government departments and semi-government organs like SANLAW that simply pushes back and pushes back and pushes back. And that's in spite of the National Climate Commission, the commitment from the President, and the unlocking units in various provinces. It's still virtually undoable if you try and navigate all those regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a sizable amount of questions. Maybe I should allow responses. Penny, do you want to? Let me suggest that it would be Penny, but maybe just on behalf of the PCC, Dr. Mutugana, we've actually decided to establish a gender reference group just specifically for the NDC process we are undertaking in support of the DFFE, because we've actually noted that the mainstream of gender issues and women issues not only just the number of is quite sufficient. So I think that our team leading the NDC, Steve, is in this meeting. Dr. Mutugana will make sure that we connect with them, but I think that they would appreciate the feedback of the academic institutions, also the NDC, particularly on the gender work in this area. So really appreciate that feedback. Penny, do you want to take the first round of questions? Then maybe Minister can see, or Minister will go to that. Okay. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll start and then Penny will pick up a couple of the issues. Yes, thank you very much for your questions. I mean, they're very insightful. And of course, as we know, we are in the process of a transition. So what transition actually means is that there is a process, and that process is ongoing, and it's going to take a long time. It's taken a long time for the world to get into this position, but of course, there is a very pressing need and an existential crisis upon us, so we need to move with speed. And I think everybody has agreed that, and I think that is a very good point from which to start. Most of the nations in the world, including South Africa, are absolutely committed to moving towards a just energy transition. There are notable exceptions that need to come to the party, and that's why discussions at COP, etc., become quite complicated. I'm sure everybody is aware that I'm a relatively newly appointed minister, and I have had the opportunity, however, to engage in numerous fora. I've been to China for the 8th Ministerial on Climate Change. I have been to Abidjan to meet the other African environment ministers to also discuss the same issue. I've been to the United Nations with the President to have discussions on climate. I've been to Rio also, where I now chair the Climate and Sustainability Work Group, the committee for G20, because South Africa is going to be the president of that next year. So there's a lot happening, and certainly the South African government and the GNU is very much animated in getting progress, and we do occupy a very important place in the world, as we all know. So on the question of the methane, yes, indeed, it is problematic. We do need to be focused absolutely on making sure that our energy gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. There is discussion in South Africa now at the moment, I'm sure you are aware, on the issue of fracking that is going to be coming up very soon, because there is also some movement in that particular direction, and that requires a lot of consultation, etc. I think there is very much an understanding that methane is in fact harmful, and that it is something that permeates the supply chains, and that transition is necessary. But I do think that if there is somebody from business who would like to address that in a little bit more detail, they can, and also Penny would maybe talk a bit to that as well. In terms of women-led organizations and consultations, yes, absolutely. I think fundamentally is that the government is absolutely committed to make sure that we hear as much as possible from our people. Because what the crucial thing is that we do want to make sure we have a just transition, and that we really do mean that nobody is left behind. Now, I was recently at a meeting in Washington of the World Bank to have a discussion with the finance ministers, the environment ministers, and the Reserve Bank governors. We have a joint committee called Task Force Klima, which basically was started by Brazil. South Africa will continue that. But that is a discussion with all the people in finance, because it's all about the money. And that's a massive thing that I'll talk to now. But on the women-led organizations, we are very mindful, and I think you'll be pleased to know that amongst our chief negotiators are a number of very bright, smart women also. In terms of the details of the mandate on mitigation, yes, it is complicated because at the last COP there was not consensus reached. I have had a number of discussions already with my Norwegian counterpart. We shall co-chair that stream. We had several meetings at pre-COP in Baku where I was. It was very clear that we are quite far apart. So what will happen is we will be having discussions individually with each delegation, because obviously what the idea is that if we're going to actually be successful at mitigation, then we obviously have to make a number of changes. So we do have the goal in mind. We want to make sure that our planet does not heat up more than 1.5 degrees. That is going to be very difficult to do. But what my objective is, and certainly my counterpart in Norway, is that we can bring the parties closer together. We did have about 4 meetings, I think, with a number of delegates from several countries, and I mean, to put it mildly, there was a bit of scratching that went on because there is quite a difference of opinion. But I think the reason why South Africa in particular was requested to co-chair is because we actually are friendly with everybody, and we are able to have conversations with everyone in the world, which is quite a unique position to be in, and we're very mindful of that, the fact that we are able to do that. So I certainly believe we'll be able to get closer. I'm not sure we'll be able to get absolute consensus, but we certainly are going to try. In fact, I'm going to plan to stay 1 or 2 days after planned, because it always runs a bit over. So we'll have to see how that goes. But certainly South Africa is occupying a very significant place in that negotiation. On the quantum of the NCQG, it's very complicated in terms of the finance, because as was mentioned, the developed economy countries were meant to contribute $100 billion per annum. They did not do that. Yeah. And the first thing I asked is the new minister, obviously, because I'm new, so when he asked these questions, I said, well, where's the spreadsheet? I mean, it's not hard. It's not hard. You just put a number, you work on a spreadsheet, you put the number in, you add it up, you press the little sum total thing, and there's the number. But apparently it's much more complicated than that, because the developed countries said, well, we paid for this, and we paid for that, and we paid for this, and therefore we did contribute the 100. But there is no spreadsheet, so that is quite interesting. But anyway, I have raised the issue, and I've said, well, even if it was 100 billion that was given, it's certainly not enough. Our view is that at least $1.3 trillion is required. Now, of course, getting the developed economy countries to actually contribute what they're supposed to is hard, because what's happened is that there has been a move towards the right, and so it's more difficult for countries to contribute. So I've said to a number of countries, who shall remain nameless at this moment, and I've said to them, look, we want a little bit of honesty here. You must say, if you're going to contribute, then do it, put it in the bank, and then you can add it on the spreadsheet. It's not hard. If you're not going to, then say no, and then we know it's not coming, and then we can make the other plan. Because South Africa's good at making a plan, keep moving forward, and that's what we do. So that's a message that we've had. Also, very importantly for South Africa, is that we have put onto the agenda, we did that first at the UN in the discussion on climate, is that we need a new financial model. The one currently is not working. And we are working on a South African model that we can present at some point, but that's a process that needs to needs to move along. So that is progressing. On CBAM, well, that's basically the unilateral measures, I think, that the question was about. Now, CBAM is problematic. We have said right from the outset that we are displeased with that, obviously. Now, in diplomatic terms, as you know, I'm a politician, not a diplomat, but displeased is a heavy word, and we have said it because we are displeased about it. It is unilateral. We don't want additional taxes, especially not externally imposed taxes, because it hurts our economy, and we already have poverty, unemployment, and we need to move on. We need growth in our economy. So what we have been doing is speaking to the European Union intensely to say we believe that it is possible to mitigate that. So if there is going to be the CBAM, of course we're unhappy about it, but it's possible to neutralize it. And we are having a conversation about how to neutralize the CBAM so it does not impact on our economy in a negative way. It is in fact possible, and that discussion is on, and we're pressing it hard, and I'm working with the Minister of Finance on that, and also the Minister